The wedding hall
You
fell
were supposed
silent.
to make sure
Glittering
everything was
chandeliers
perfect.
cast a golden
You
glow
ruined
across the
my
vast
wedding.
ballroom of the Brentwood Country Club, where hundreds of Los
You were
Angeles's
supposed to make sure
wealthiest guests
everything
leaned
was
forward in
perfect.
anticipation.
You ruined my wedding.
Isabella Hayes, the bride draped in couture lace and diamonds, lifted the microphone with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "For our next song," she announced, her tone sweet as poisoned honey, "my maid, Grace Turner, will be giving us a special performance." Gasps rippled through the room. Heads turned toward the corner where a young woman in a plain black uniform stood frozen. Grace's hands instinctively covered her swollen belly. At 6 months pregnant, she looked more like she belonged in a quiet kitchen than on a stage in front of the city's elite. Her lips parted in protest, but Isabella's manicured finger pointed directly at her, silencing any hope of escape. "Come now, Grace. Don't be shy. Everyone is waiting." Two security guards moved subtly to block the exits near the staff. Grace realized with horror she had no choice. The whispers began before she took her first step. "A maid? She's pregnant. What is Isabella thinking?" Some guests chuckled, expecting spectacle. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Grace's heart hammered against her ribs as she climbed the steps to the stage. The spotlight blinded her, but what burned hotter was Isabella's triumphant smile from across the room. This wasn't an honor, it was a trap. That morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ethan Cole's mansion. Grace pushed her cleaning cart along the marble corridor, one hand instinctively resting on her belly. At 28, this wasn't the life she had dreamed of. Once, she had chased music in Nashville, scribbling lyrics on diner napkins and singing her heart out in smoky bars. That dream had ended the night Ryan Carter, a smooth-talking guitarist, vanished after she told him she was pregnant. Now she was a live-in maid, invisible inside Ethan's sprawling estate. Ethan Cole, tech mogul, millionaire, soon-to-be groom, treated her with courtesy. But his fiancée, Isabella Hayes, saw only something to step over. "Just because you work here doesn't mean I have to look at you," Isabella sneered earlier in the day, sweeping past in a silk robe. "Try to stay out of my sight." "Yes, Miss Hayes," Grace murmured, pressing herself against the wall. Her saving grace, literally, was Marco Rivera, the mansion's head chef. That morning he'd stopped her in the kitchen, sliding a plate of eggs and toast toward her. "Eat," he insisted with his easy smile. "You're feeding too now." Grace had smiled, exhaustion etched in her eyes. "2 more days, Marco. Then maybe it will calm down." He shook his head. "Or maybe Isabella will get worse." They both knew the truth of that. By noon, the mansion buzzed like a beehive. Florists carried towers of white roses, caterers rehearsed timing, and the wedding planner Sophie Lane darted between rooms with her clipboard. Isabella's voice echoed everywhere, barking orders about flower colors, chair placement, and champagne brands. Grace kept her head down, polishing windows until her back ached. When she bent to pick up a towel, pain shot up her side. She straightened, wincing, only to find Ethan Cole watching her from the hallway. "You should be resting, Grace," he said gently. Salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses. Ethan had the aura of a man who built empires but still noticed the details others missed. "I'm fine, Mr. Cole. Just back pain." He frowned. "Take breaks when you need them. Your health comes first." His kindness warmed her, though she noticed Isabella lurking nearby, eyes narrowed at the exchange. Later, as Grace dusted Ethan's study, habit overtook her. She hummed softly, an old song she'd written in Nashville about surviving heartbreak. Her voice rose and fell, aching yet hopeful. She didn't realize Ethan stood listening until she turned and nearly dropped her rag. "Please don't stop," he said. "You have a beautiful voice." Her cheeks flushed. "It's nothing, sir. I used to sing before." She gestured to her uniform, her belly. "Talent like that shouldn't be hidden," Ethan said. But their moment was cut short when Isabella appeared, lips pressed thin. Your tuxedo arrived, she snapped at Ethan. Now! He followed obediently. Isabella lingered just long enough to flash Grace a look that chilled her blood. That night at the rehearsal dinner, Grace moved silently among the glittering crowd, refilling water glasses. She overheard whispers, disaster with the hired singer, a sudden case of laryngitis. Isabella's composure cracked, then smoothed again when Ethan's mother, Evelyn Cole, casually mentioned hearing Grace sing once. Grace? Isabella repeated slowly, eyes glinting with calculation. The rest of the evening, Grace caught Isabella watching her with that same sly smile. Later, Marco delivered dessert to Grace's small room. He closed the door and lowered his voice. They were laughing at you, Grace, talking about a special surprise for the wedding. Be careful. Grace lay awake that night, uneasy. She remembered Isabella's words to Sophie. Everything is arranged. Tomorrow will be unforgettable. She had no idea how right she was. Now, forced under the blazing lights, Grace stared at the sheet of lyrics Isabella thrust into her trembling hands. It was an impossible ballad, filled with high notes she hadn't reached in years. Designed to break her, the bandleader approached, whispering nervously, "We don't have this arrangement. Miss, what should we play?" Grace's pulse thundered. She could attempt Isabella's trap and fail, or she could choose something else. Something hers. "Give me a slow, 4-beat rhythm," she said firmly. The drummer tapped gently. Grace closed her eyes. Thought of the baby kicking inside her. Thought of nights in Nashville when music was her only light. Then she opened her mouth. "This song is called Rise from the Ashes," she whispered into the mic. Her voice cracked at first, raw with fear, but then it soared, strong and soulful. Lyrics poured out about betrayal, survival, finding fire after everything burns down. The ballroom froze. The whispers died. Even the waiters stopped mid-step. Ethan Cole stood at the back, stunned, watching the maid he barely knew transform into someone radiant, commanding, unbreakable. Evelyn pressed a hand to her chest. Daniel Brooks, Ethan's best friend, leaned forward, awestruck. Isabella's smile curdled into fury. Grace's voice swelled to the final chorus, the words trembling but defiant. "I will rise from the ashes, stronger than before." Silence hung for 3 long seconds. Then the applause erupted. Guests stood, clapping, some wiping tears. For a fleeting moment, Grace felt whole again, her dream alive. Then Isabella snatched the microphone. "Wasn't that cute?" she said loudly. "Now back to the kitchen where you belong." The applause faltered into uneasy murmurs. Grace, humiliated again, turned to leave the stage quickly. She didn't see the puddle of spilled water near the monitors. Her foot slipped. The world tilted. Pain ripped through her side as she crashed down onto the stage floor. Instinctively, she curled around her belly. The crowd gasped. Ethan shouted her name. Marco sprinted forward. Evelyn rose to her feet, and Isabella, still gripping the microphone, hissed, "Richard, this is our wedding. Don't waste it on the help." But Ethan ignored her, kneeling beside Grace. His tuxedo sleeves darkened against the wet stage as he pressed close, voice urgent. "Grace, are you hurt? Is the baby okay?" Her breath came shallow, pain stabbing her ribs. I don't know." The spotlight still blazed, the entire ballroom watching as the carefully orchestrated wedding crumbled into chaos. And Grace Turner, the invisible maid, realized her life would never be the same again. The scream tore through the ballroom before Grace even hit the ground. It wasn't hers, it came from the crowd. Horrified to see a pregnant woman fall in front of 300 guests, the chandelier light seemed to blur as Grace curled protectively around her belly, sharp pain radiating down her hip. "Call 911!" Daniel Brooks barked from the back, already pulling out his phone. Ethan Cole's polished shoes clattered against the stage as he shoved past stunned musicians. He dropped to his knees beside Grace, ignoring the expensive tuxedo he had just donned. "Grace, talk to me," he urged, his voice cracking. I, I think the baby's okay," Grace whispered, one arm shielding her stomach, the other bracing against the slick wood. Her uniform clung damp to her side. "Don't move," Marco Rivera warned, rushing up with a towel from the kitchen. He knelt opposite Ethan, his face drawn tight. "She's in shock. Keep her still." Isabella Hayes stood a few feet away, white gown gleaming, expression tight with rage. She still held the microphone, though no one was listening anymore. "Richard," she snapped, still calling Ethan by his first name. "This is ridiculous. Our first dance is ruined." Ethan's head whipped toward her, eyes flashing. "Her name is Grace," he growled, "and she's carrying a child." The crowd murmured, uneasy. Some pulled out phones, recording. From her seat, Evelyn Cole stood tall. "Isabella," she said coldly, her voice carrying more authority than the bride's shrill protests. "Enough." But Isabella wasn't finished. "She's just the help. You're humiliating yourself." The ballroom speaker suddenly crackled. A voice poured out, not live but recorded. "I can't wait to see that pregnant nobody make a fool of herself. I told security not to let her leave the stage no matter what. It'll put her back in her place." Gasps sliced through the room like knives. Heads whipped toward the source. Marco Rivera stood near the band's soundboard, phone in hand, volume turned high. Calm, steady. He held it aloft so all could hear. "Recorded this morning," he said evenly. "Bride talking to her bridesmaids." The recording continued, Isabella's voice unmistakable. "Ethan will never know I set her up. He'll just think she embarrassed herself trying to get attention." Silence, then chaos. Guests whispered, some openly glaring at Isabella. Others filmed, capturing her pale face as her perfect wedding cracked apart. "That's a lie," Isabella screeched. "It's edited, taken out of context." "Context?" Evelyn's voice was ice. "You trapped a pregnant woman on stage. We all saw it." Ethan stood slowly, his hand still gentle on Grace's shoulder. He looked at Isabella, no longer with confusion, but with clarity sharpened by betrayal. His fingers went to his left hand. With deliberate calm, he slid the wedding band from his finger. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. What are you doing?" Isabella's voice faltered. "This marriage," Ethan said, his voice low but carrying across the silent room, "is over. It lasted less than 2 hours, but that's long enough to see who you are." Isabella lunged toward him. "You can't end it like this, in front of everyone." "I can, and I will." He turned to the crowd. "I apologize to you all. The reception is canceled. Please go home." Phones recorded every word. Within hours, they'd be online. 2 paramedics arrived, pushing a stretcher. They knelt beside Grace, speaking calmly. "Ma'am, how far along are you?" 6 months, she gasped. "Any bleeding? Fluid loss?" "No, just pain." "Right side." "Let's not take chances," one paramedic said. "We're transferring her to Cedars-Sinai." Ethan moved to follow. Isabella blocked his path, desperate now. "He's my husband. He's not going anywhere with her." Ethan's reply was calm, final. "No, Isabella, I'm not your husband. The paperwork isn't filed. It never will be." He brushed past her, to the paramedics. He said, "I'm her employer. I'm responsible for her well-being. I'll follow in my car." As Grace was lifted onto the stretcher, tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from the avalanche of humiliation. Her world had collapsed in one night. Job gone, home gone, reputation shattered. Marco appeared at her side, more squeezing her hand. "Don't worry about your thing," he murmured. "I'll pack them. You're not coming back there with her around." "Thank you," Grace whispered, voice breaking. Evelyn leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from Grace's damp forehead. You focus on that baby, she said. I'll see you tomorrow. The stretcher rolled out through the ballroom doors, past discarded champagne glasses and guests whispering in disbelief. In the distance, Isabella's voice rose, shrill, begging Ethan. You're choosing her? Over me? Over us? Ethan didn't even look back. There never was an us. Cedars-Sinai Hospital, Los Angeles. The antiseptic brightness was almost a relief after the glittering cruelty of the ballroom. Nurses hurried Grace into an exam room, strapping monitors around her belly. The steady thump-thump of her baby's heartbeat filled the air. Relief washed over her, but fear lingered. What next? Where could she go? Outside, Ethan paced the hallway, tuxedo rumpled, tie gone. Nurses glanced curiously, whispering, recognizing the millionaire groom whose wedding had imploded. He ignored them, phone buzzing with messages from Daniel. 30 minutes later, Dr. Harper emerged. Mr. Cole, Ethan straightened immediately. How is she? The baby? Stable. She experienced Braxton Hicks contractions triggered by stress and the fall, bruising, but no sign of placental abruption. We'll monitor her overnight. Ethan exhaled, shoulders slumping. Thank God. You can see her now. He entered quietly. Grace lay in the bed, monitor beeping steadily beside her. She looked up, eyes red-rimmed, exhausted. The baby's okay, she whispered before he could ask. I know, the doctor told me. He sat beside her, his hand tentative on the edge of the mattress. How are you? Sore, embarrassed, terrified. She looked away. I'm sorry about your wedding. Don't apologize, Ethan said firmly. You saved me from the worst mistake of my life. Her laugh was bitter. Some savior. I lost everything tonight. No, he said, voice steady. You still have your voice. I saw it. Everyone did. She blinked, stunned. No one had spoken of her singing with such conviction since Nashville. Silence stretched, broken only by the monitor's rhythmic beeps. You have more strength than you realize, Ethan said softly. Don't let her take that from you. Grace swallowed hard. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe he might be right. The next morning, when Grace woke, Evelyn sat beside her, knitting needles clicking softly. Marco dozed in the corner, arms folded. You didn't have to stay, Grace murmured. Nonsense, Evelyn replied. Family isn't just blood. Tears pricked Grace's eyes. She turned away, embarrassed. Moments later, Ethan entered carrying 3 cups of coffee. He looked less like a groom now, more like a man stripped of illusions. I've arranged for you to be discharged today, he told Grace. But you can't go back to the mansion. I know, her voice cracked. I have nowhere else. You do now, Ethan said quietly. I have a guest house on my property. Separate entrance, private. You and the baby can stay there until you're back on your feet. Grace shook her head. I can't accept that. It's too much. Consider it severance, Ethan said. And a chance. Because your song last night, the world should hear it. She stared at him, disbelief written on her face. You want me to sing? I want to introduce you to people who can help. Producers, friends. If you'll trust me. The weight of his words sank in. Grace Turner, once invisible, now stood at the edge of a future she hadn't dared dream of. Outside the hospital window, Los Angeles shimmered in morning sun. Her old life had burned to ash. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to rise again. The first time Grace stepped into Ethan Cole's guest house, she thought there must have been some mistake. The small Spanish-style villa sat nestled behind rows of sycamore trees, its terracotta roof glowing warmly under the Los Angeles sun. This wasn't a servant's quarter or a temporary shelter. It was a home, bright windows spilling light across hardwood floors, a tidy kitchen stocked with food, A bedroom with a bed softer than anything she'd ever slept on. Her few belongings, carefully packed by Marco, sat neatly on a dresser. For a long moment, Grace simply stood in the doorway, her hand resting on her swollen belly, trying to absorb the impossible shift. 2 nights earlier, she had been scrubbing toilets, invisible and despised. Now, because of one song and one man's belief, she was being offered a second chance. Ethan hovered a few feet behind her, his voice quiet. It's not charity. Consider this a place to rest until you figure out your next steps. Grace turned to him, eyes wide. Why are you doing this? He hesitated before answering. Because I owe you the truth. I was blind to who Isabella really was. You opened my eyes. And because, his gaze softened. Your voice deserves to be heard. She wanted to argue, to tell him dreams were luxuries she no longer believed in. But Evelyn appeared at the door carrying grocery bags filled with herbal teas, prenatal vitamins, and stretch mark cream, bustling in as though Grace had always belonged here. Nonsense, Evelyn said when Grace stammered her thanks. Every expectant mother deserves a little comfort. Now sit, dear. You shouldn't be on your feet too long. For the first time since Nashville, Grace felt something stir inside her chest that wasn't fear. It was possibility. The following weeks blurred into something she could hardly recognize as her own life. Ethan arranged a visit from Caleb Morris, a seasoned music producer with gray dreadlocks and a reputation for discovering raw talent. He listened intently as Grace, nervous but determined, sang the same song she had performed at the wedding, this time in the quiet living room of the guest house with only a borrowed microphone between them. When she finished, Caleb leaned back, eyes shining. That's not just good, he said. That's real, raw, powerful. We can build something around this. Grace nearly cried from the relief. For years, her voice had been buried under scrubbing brushes and mop water. Now it was being treated as something valuable again. Ethan sat nearby, arms folded, trying not to look too pleased but failing. Caleb returned days later with soundproofing panels, a small recording setup, and a plan. They began laying down demos, just Grace and her lyrics, her voice trembling at first, then growing surer with each take. Between sessions, she folded tiny baby clothes Evelyn had bought, her belly tightening as the weeks drew on. Marco stopped by with containers of food, teasing that she'd better become famous soon so he could brag that he'd fed her first. Daniel visited once, bringing legal papers Ethan needed signed, and quietly told Grace that the fallout from the wedding had left Isabella's family scrambling. You don't need to worry about her anymore, he assured. Grace nodded, though a small part of her still trembled whenever she remembered Isabella's cruel smile. One quiet dawn, her water broke. She called Ethan in a panic, and within minutes he was at her door, helping her into his car. At Cedars-Sinai, hours blurred into waves of pain, contractions building like tidal surges that stole her breath. Nurses encouraged her. Evelyn held her hand, and Ethan refused to leave her side no matter how many times she told him he didn't need to stay. I'm not going anywhere, he said simply. 6 hours later, with a cry that split the sterile hospital air, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby girl weighing 7 pounds 4 ounces. The nurse placed the warm, squirming infant against her chest. Tears streamed down Grace's face as she whispered, Lily. Her name is Lily Turner. For a moment, the world shrank to nothing but her, and the tiny heartbeat pressed against hers. Evelyn wept quietly. Marco wiped his eyes in the corner, and even Daniel, ever composed, cleared his throat suspiciously. Ethan stood back, watching with an expression Grace couldn't quite read, something between awe and tenderness. In that sterile room, amid beeping machines and hushed voices, Grace felt both exhausted and whole. She was a mother now, and she would never be invisible again. Days in the hospital passed quickly. Caleb sent recordings, promising that the label executives were excited. Your story is compelling, But your voice, that's what sells it, he told Ethan over the phone. Grace listened from her bed, nursing Lily, hardly believing this was her life. A week later, discharged and fragile but glowing, she returned to the guest house with her newborn. Ethan had prepared everything. A crib assembled in the corner, fresh flowers on the table, soft blankets folded neatly. He even hired a part-time nurse to help, insisting Grace needed rest if she was going to record. Between late-night feedings and diaper changes, she sang into the microphone Caleb had set up. Her voice had changed, warmer, deeper, layered with the raw vulnerability of new motherhood. When Caleb heard the new takes, he leaned forward in the studio chair, almost stunned. "This is it," he said. "This isn't just a song. This is a movement." Sorry, Grace laughed through her exhaustion. But when she listened to the playback herself, goosebumps prickled her arms. The track captured every ounce of pain and survival she had endured, from Ryan's abandonment to Isabella's cruelty to the miracle of holding Lily. It was more than music. It was her story. Weeks turned into months. Rise from the Ashes was released as a single and, to Grace's disbelief, began climbing charts. At first 1,000 plays, then 10,000, then hundreds of thousands. Radio hosts spoke her name. A late-night program ran a feature about the maid who stunned a millionaire's wedding. Grace hated the word maid attached to her identity, but when she saw fans online praising her courage and voice, she let it slide. She focused on Lily, rocking her between recording takes, whispering lullabies while Evelyn and Marco fussed over them both. Ethan became a constant presence, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes cradling Lily so Grace could nap, sometimes just sitting quietly in the corner as she practiced. She never asked why he gave so much of himself. She only knew that when he was there, she felt steadier, as though the ground beneath her finally held firm. One evening, as the sun set orange over Los Angeles, Grace stepped outside onto the patio, Lily asleep in her bassinet beside her. The soft hum of traffic drifted in the distance, mingling with the faint sound of her own voice playing back from inside the house. She wrapped a blanket tighter around herself, thinking of the strange road that had led here, the humiliation, the fall, the hospital, the unexpected kindness of strangers who had become family. Her eyes closed as she whispered to the baby, "Our life is different now, Lily. We're going to rise, you and me." Behind her, Ethan stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching mother and daughter silhouetted against the fading light. He didn't interrupt. He only smiled faintly, as though seeing a future neither of them had dared to imagine until now. The first call came on an ordinary afternoon, when Grace was rocking Lily in her arms after a long recording session. The number was unfamiliar. She almost didn't answer, but exhaustion lowered her guard. "Hello?" she said softly, her voice careful not to wake the baby. A pause, then a male voice she hadn't heard in nearly a year. "Grace, it's me, Ryan." Her body went rigid. For a moment she couldn't breathe. "How did you get this number?" she whispered, clutching Lily tighter. "I saw you on the news," Ryan admitted, his tone carrying an awkward mix of bravado and shame. "Your song, it's everywhere. And I heard you had the baby. I want to see her. I want to meet my daughter." Rage and disbelief crashed through Grace all at once. "You walked out the day I told you I was pregnant. You disappeared. Not a call, not a word. And now, because the world knows my name, you suddenly care?" "I wasn't ready then," Ryan said quickly. "But I am now. I want to be in her life." Grace's hand shook as she ended the call without another word. Her heart pounded. She looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully, completely unaware of the storm that had just blown open. That night, she told Ethan everything. He listened in silence, jaw tightening as she described Ryan's sudden interest. "He has some legal rights," Ethan admitted carefully. "But given his abandonment, they're weak. You need a lawyer before you agree to anything." Grace buried her face in her hands. I can't afford a custody battle. Ethan leaned forward, his voice steady. You won't have to. I'll connect you with Barbara Chen, one of the best family lawyers in the city. She'll protect you and Lily. Grace nodded slowly, the tension in her chest easing, though the fear lingered like smoke that refused to clear. That night she lay awake long after Lily had drifted back to sleep, staring at the ceiling of the guest house, hearing Ryan's voice replay in her head like a ghost that refused to leave. The next day, Barbara Chen arrived with a leather briefcase and calm eyes. She listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and took notes on everything Grace remembered. When Ryan left, how long he'd been gone, how he'd only returned after her music found success. His case is weak, Barbara said firmly. He abandoned both you and the child. Courts don't look kindly on that. At most, he could request supervised visitation, but even then, we'll set strict conditions. Grace exhaled shakily. I just don't want him near her. Not after everything. Then let me handle it, Barbara said. Don't meet him alone. Don't respond to calls. Every communication comes through me now. Grace felt a flicker of strength return. She wasn't alone anymore. But Ryan wasn't finished. A week later, his father, Frank Carter, called. The voice on the line was colder, older, more commanding. I understand you're refusing my son access to his child, Frank said bluntly. That's unacceptable. Lily is part of our family. You can't keep her from us. Grace gripped the phone, fury rising. Your son abandoned us. He doesn't get to reappear when it's convenient. You're being unreasonable, Frank pressed. Ryan has changed. He deserves a chance. Grace's voice shook, but she didn't back down. My daughter deserves stability, not a father who only shows up when fame and money are involved. Talk to my lawyer. She hung up before he could respond, then collapsed into tears. When Ethan arrived minutes later, she was still shaking. He crouched beside her, his hand steady on her arm. You did the right thing, he said quietly. They can't take her from you. Not now. Not ever. Even as Ryan's shadow loomed, Grace's career surged forward. Rise from the ashes, climbed into the Billboard Top 10, then number 5. Caleb pushed her toward new opportunities, interviews, recording sessions, a televised performance that drew millions of viewers. Everywhere she went, people whispered her name with admiration. But inside, Grace felt torn between triumph and terror. Each time she looked at Lily, she imagined Ryan's face appearing at her door, demanding rights he hadn't earned. At night, she sometimes dreamed of Isabella's cruel smile merging with Ryan's voice, both trying to pull her down. She would wake in a sweat, reaching desperately for Lily's crib until the baby's steady breathing soothed her. The confrontation she dreaded came sooner than she expected. 3 weeks before her scheduled industry showcase, there was a knock at the door. When she opened it, Ryan stood there in faded jeans and a leather jacket, smirking as though nothing had ever happened. Grace, he said, spreading his arms. You look amazing, and this must be. His eyes darted past her shoulder, searching. Grace blocked the doorway, her body taut with rage. You can't just show up here. All communication goes through Barbara Chen. Leave. Ryan chuckled softly. Come on, don't be like that. I just want to see my daughter. She's mine too. She's not a prize you get to claim when it suits you, Grace snapped. You left. You forfeited that right. Behind her, Ethan appeared. Lily balanced against his shoulder. Ryan's smirk faltered when he saw them together. So that's what this is, he sneered. You've got yourself a rich boyfriend now. That's why you're keeping me away. Ethan's voice was calm but steel-edged. This has nothing to do with me. You need to leave before I call the police. Ryan's eyes darkened, but he stepped back. This isn't over, he muttered. I'll see you in court. Then he turned and stalked away, leaving Grace trembling in the doorway. That night, As Lily slept, Grace sat with Ethan on the patio, the air heavy with the smell of jasmine. "What if he actually tries to take her?" she whispered, her hands twisting in her lap. Ethan looked at her steadily, the moonlight catching the silver in his hair. "He won't. Courts don't reward abandonment, and you're not fighting alone. Barbara will make sure of that. I'll make sure of that." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "Why are you doing all this for me? For us?" Ethan's reply was simple, but it shook her. "Because I care. About you. About Lily. Because everyone deserves someone in their corner." She stared at him, searching his face, and in the silence that followed, something unspoken passed between them. Something fragile, dangerous, and undeniable. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Caleb pushed her harder in the studio, insisting the world was ready for more of her voice. The label announced her first full album. Evelyn came by daily with groceries, rocking Lily so Grace could rehearse. Marco tested new recipes in the kitchen and teased her about becoming a celebrity. But underneath the laughter, tension remained. Court papers arrived, Ryan's demands scrawled across legal documents. Though Barbara assured her his case was weak, Grace pushed forward, channeling her fear into her music. Each note carried the weight of everything she fought for: her daughter's future, her dignity, her rebirth. One night, after a long recording session, Ethan helped her carry Lily to bed. They lingered in the nursery, the soft glow of a nightlight painting the walls. Grace rocked Lily gently, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so scared sometimes," she admitted. "But then I look at her, and I know I can't give up. Not now. Not ever." Ethan touched her shoulder lightly. "You won't have to. You're stronger than you think." She turned toward him, their eyes locking, and for the first time she didn't look away. The space between them seemed to hum with unspoken words. But Lily stirred, breaking the moment, and Grace laughed softly, brushing tears from her cheeks. "Looks like she has good timing." Ethan smiled, though his gaze lingered, heavy with everything he didn't say. As the showcase approached, Grace stood at the threshold of a future both terrifying and beautiful. Her song had risen from ashes into fire, lighting a path she never expected to walk. But behind her, Ryan's shadow still loomed, threatening to pull her back into darkness. She kissed Lily's forehead, whispering a promise. "No one will take you from me. Not him. Not anyone." And as she looked out the window at the city lights stretching endlessly into the night, she felt the truth settle deep in her bones. This fight was only beginning, but she was no longer the maid hiding in shadows. She was Grace Turner, mother, artist, survivor, and she was ready to face whatever storm came next. The night of the Hollywood Bowl concert arrived like a storm Grace had spent her whole life walking toward. From the wings of the massive stage, she could see thousands of seats stretching up into the night, every one of them filled, the buzz of anticipation rolling like thunder through the open-air arena. Her hands trembled as she adjusted the microphone, her breath shallow. Just 1 year ago, she had been scrubbing marble floors, invisible in Ethan Cole's mansion. Now her name glowed on the giant screens in lights brighter than she ever imagined. Grace Turner, live in concert, backstage. Evelyn held Lily in her arms, rocking her gently, whispering promises that her mother was about to change both their lives forever. Marco and Daniel hovered nearby, their faces beaming with pride, while Caleb checked last-minute details with the sound crew. And then Ethan appeared, dressed simply in a dark suit, his presence steadying her the way it always had. "You can do this," he told her, his voice low but certain. She looked at him, searching for doubt, but found none. He held her gaze until her shoulders eased, until the panic that had clawed at her chest softened into determination. "You were born to do this," he said, and she believed him. The announcer's voice boomed across the bowl, echoing off the hills of Los Angeles. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Grace Turner, The roar that followed nearly knocked her back. Blinding lights swept across the stage, catching her in their white-hot beams. For a heartbeat she froze, her throat closing, fear threatening to undo her. Then she looked into the crowd and found them, Ethan in the front row, Lily perched on his lap with Evelyn steadying her tiny hand, Marco waving like he was cheering for family, Daniel clapping hard, his smile uncharacteristically wide. Their faces anchored her. Grace stepped forward, lifted the microphone, and spoke with a voice steadier than she felt. A year ago, I was a maid, cleaning someone else's home, pregnant and terrified about the future. Tonight, I stand here because of one truth. I refuse to stay broken. This is for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong on the stage of their own life. The first notes of Rise from the Ashes began. Soft piano under dim lights. Grace closed her eyes and let the song rise from deep inside her, carrying all the pain and beauty of her journey. Her voice trembled on the first verse, then gathered power, soaring over the audience, filling every corner of the bowl with defiance and hope. She sang of betrayal and abandonment, of humiliation and despair, but also of survival, of fire kindled from ruin, of standing taller after every fall. By the chorus, the crowd was on its feet, thousands of voices shouting in unison, clapping to the beat, tears streaming down faces she could barely see but could feel in the collective energy rising toward her. The stage lights caught the shimmer of wetness on her cheeks, but she didn't wipe it away. Every note was truth. Every lyric was her heart, bare and unashamed. As the final chorus rang out, she reached for the highest note she had ever dared attempt, her voice cutting through the night air like a blade of light. The bowl erupted, screams, applause, a standing ovation that shook the ground beneath her feet. Grace bowed, overwhelmed, then looked toward the front row. Ethan stood, Lily cradled against his chest, both of them beaming at her with pride so fierce it nearly brought her to her knees. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just singing for herself anymore. She was singing for Lily, for every woman who had ever been silenced, for every dream crushed under someone else's heel. She was no longer the maid hiding in shadows. She was an artist, a mother, a survivor. She was Grace Turner. Backstage after the concert, reporters swarmed, flashes exploding, voices shouting her name. Caleb tried to shield her, but Grace held her head high, answering with quiet dignity. Ethan finally broke through the chaos, Lily asleep on his shoulder. He reached her, his free hand brushing her arm. "You were extraordinary," he said simply, his eyes searching hers. She felt tears rise again, not from exhaustion, but from the weight of everything they had survived together. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You always could. You just needed someone to remind you." Their gazes held, the world fading around them, and in that silence she knew what she had been afraid to admit. Ethan wasn't just her employer, or her rescuer, or her friend. He was the man who had stood by her when everyone else turned away. The man who looked at her not as a maid, not as a victim, but as someone extraordinary. As they walked out of the bowl, surrounded by cheers, paparazzi flashes, and the glow of a city that finally knew her name, Grace whispered to Lily, sleeping peacefully against Ethan's chest, "We did it, baby. We really did it." The night sky stretched above them, vast and endless, and for the first time, Grace felt not just that she had risen from the ashes, but that she had learned to fly. And if you've stayed with Grace's journey all this way, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of courage, heartbreak, and redemption. Because sometimes, the moments that break us the most are the very ones that build us into who we were always meant to be.